Milder into the weekend. Still cold enough for some snow on the hills of northern England initially and across the mountains of Scotland. But for most, Saturday will be a damp day. Certainly a wet start, a pulse of heavy rain. It looks like moving across England and Wales. Turning drier in the west come Saturday afternoon. A mixture of sunshine and showers, and turning milder, although not feeling very mild, with the wet weather lingering across the eastern side of England. Those set of weather fronts do clear away, and then a bit of a gap between weather systems on Sunday. There'll be some showers across the northwest and later rain across Northern Ireland and Wales. But for many, Sunday is the drier and brighter day this weekend.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 a.m. this Friday morning, and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and radio. Today we're exploring what on earth this Downing Street flat story is all about, exploring the aftermath of last year's Capitol Hill riot and an opportunity of Brexit in the agricultural sector. That and why a Love Island star is drawing comparisons to Margaret Thatcher. All with you after the headlines. There. Well, on with the briefing. Boris Johnson has been criticised by his standards advisor over lost WhatsApp messages in the Downing Street flat renovation row. The newly released chat reveals that Johnson discussed Lord Brownlow's plans for a so-called Great Exhibition at the same time as financing for the flat. Labour says the messages with the donor raised questions about cash for access and asked the Commons Standards Commissioner to investigate. But let's get to my thoughts on this issue. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on TV and on your radio. Turning to this story of the texts, the ethics and interior design. That long-running Downing Street flat refurbishment story has once again reared its ugly head, now with claims of withheld text messages. So what on earth is going on? And does it even matter? Well, 2 years ago, when the Prime Minister and his partner moved into his plush flat above number 11 Downing Street, they were keen to give it a thorough and expensive zhuzhing up. Given that the Downing Street is a place of work and frequently receives international dignitaries, this is not a particularly unreasonable demand, but it does require cash, something the Prime Minister has had a difficult relationship with in the past. Boris Johnson has often complained about money troubles, as multiple divorces and a less than clear number of children have left him feeling less than flush with cash. This is despite the very generous salaries he has had over the years. The problem with getting someone else to pay for a six-figure flat refurbishment, however, is that the claims of undue influence then arise. The idea of cash for access. Downing Street say a blind trust was to be set up to pay for renovation so that the Prime Minister could remain in the dark about who had funded it and avoid any of these claims of sleaze. Lord Brownlow, a Tory donor, was to oversee that trust. Some claim, however, that the Prime Minister concocted a plan for Brownlow to personally fund the renovation. After that whole mess, Boris Johnson ended up footing the bill himself. Yet the idea that Boris planned for Brownlow to fund the refurbishment himself appears to be more serious in light of newly surfaced text messages between the pair. Text messages that did not form part of Lord Gates' initial investigation, he, of course, being the independent investigator. In 2020, Boris said parts of his flat were still a tip and asked Brownlow to contact designer Lulu Lytle for approvals. Curiously, Boris also mentioned a great exhibition plan in that same text message, something Lord Brownlow had been championing in conjunction with the Royal Albert Hall, an organisation he is a trustee of. Now, in Number 10's defence, the Great Exhibition 2.0 plan is something that the government is not pursuing, despite a later meeting taking place between Brownlow and then Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden, that is. Fair enough. Although we're entitled to ask why these texts were not handed in to Lord Gates in his initial investigation. Boris says that they got lost as he had to change his phone number for security reasons. Yesterday, he offered his humble and sincere apologies for that oversight. Gate described the situation as plainly unsatisfactory, yet crucially exonerated Boris over the charge of breaking the ministerial code. The Electoral Commission, however, last month fined the Tory party over £17,000 over inaccurately reported donations related to this whole affair. In short, this is a very messy situation. There exist some convincing claims and other convincing counterclaims. Perhaps it is simply all too complicated to cut through to very much at all. Well, moving on to our next story this morning, US President Joe Biden has accused Donald Trump and his supporters of holding a dagger at the throat of democracy. This was, of course, part of his commemoration service yesterday, marking the anniversary of what has become known as the US Capitol insurrection last year. Mr. Biden blamed the attack on the former president, saying he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. The event sent shockwaves through American politics. Well, former senior advisor to President Trump, Jason Miller, was on Dan Wootton's show last night on the anniversary. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Ultimately, yes, and thanks for having me back on. You know, one of the things I'd point out with regard to Twitter is the formal justification they gave for getting rid of President Trump is when President Trump said he would not attend Joe Biden's inauguration. And so it wasn't actually the 6th. They waited for a couple days after that. But it was really only a matter of when, not if, they kicked off President Trump. And I think President Trump was right when he said that if they'll do it to him, they'll do it to anyone. Look what they've done to Dr. Robert Malone, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Congresswoman, as you said, Of course, that led to Joe Rogan coming and joining us on Sunday. We have had 1 million people join our platform this week. We just crossed the 4 million mark overall. We hit #1 in the Apple social media store, and we hit #2 in the Google Play Store for all categories. So I think Twitter, though, made a business decision. They knew what they were doing, and they don't care. They want to remove people with a certain point of view.
Yet, Jason, they allow the Taliban, which bludgeons women and gay people to death on Twitter. They allow various Chinese government propaganda Twitter accounts to remain on their platform.
Yeah, and you make a really good point. In addition to the Taliban, they also allow the Ayatollah. They allow the political director for Hamas. And I would be clear, when we talk about a political director for Hamas, that's not somebody who puts up yard signs in advance of an election or volunteers outside of a precinct. That's someone who plots to go and try to kill people of Israel. And so they allow those types of characters on, but then they draw the line and say that President Trump or Dr. Malone, who will be a brilliant guest when you have him join on Monday, they'll go and kick them off. But I think what's happening right now, it's just outright political discrimination. They've made the decision that they support free speech, but only if they agree with your point of view.
And Jason, tell me something that you're doing on Getter. You are particularly going to look after people, right, who are worried about having their platform deleted by Twitter. Is that right? There's a way where you can sort of import your past into Getter so you don't lose all of your history.
Exactly. So folks who might not be familiar with Getter, I'd say we're a marketplace competitor to both Twitter and to Facebook. One of the really cool features that we did was make it possible for people to import their entire tweet history into their Getter timeline. So their intellectual property, their content comes with them, whether it's videos or memes or different things. So you don't lose any of that. And in a couple weeks, we're going to have it where you post on Getter. It'll also show up on Twitter. So you don't even have to go back to Twitter anymore. You're going to communicate with them. Here's the exciting thing, though. Even though we're just now at 4 million users, the engagement level is so high that when the Daily Mail, who joined Getter as well this week, when they've been posting on Getter, they're getting higher engagement than when they post on Twitter. That tells you the level of enthusiasm that our base has on the Getter platform.
Okay, Jason, what about people who say, but you're allowing all of this hate on your platform, that you're allowing extremists on your platform? Is there any truth in that?
No, and actually this is a really good point. I'm glad you bring this up because we do have terms of service. They're very clearly spelled out, and we're not going to allow any racial or religious epithets. We're not going to allow people to threaten violence against someone or dox them with personal information or suggest that people go and harm themselves. And we've also gone through and blocked a number of these terrorist accounts, such as the Ayatollah and the Taliban, so they cannot set up the same name at Getter. Our philosophy is that your free speech rights really extend up to the point where they start to infringe on somebody else's rights. We want to make sure that this is a political safe space, that no one will ever be censored or deplatformed or algorithm for their political beliefs. But we also want to make sure that it's a safe environment for people. So that's something I take very seriously. I probably spend more of my time dealing with moderation and security issues than just about anything else. But that's what the issue is right now when you talk about big tech. This isn't about the extremists or people who are preaching violence. Everyone's on the same page, or virtually everyone, that there's no place for that in the digital town square. That's not political debate. But when it comes to people who dare to say, well, let's go and question what's going on with the lockdowns or the forced mandates, or even if we talk about, say, election concerns, we should be able to have that debate, because here's the point. It doesn't matter if you're in the UK or in the US. If we can't have that conversation online, people are just going to go to their respective ideological corners, and it'll push people even further apart in society.
Dan Wootton's show last night there, exploring that issue, of course. Well, let's explore it a little further this morning now. Joe Biden made some pretty incendiary remarks last night, ones that some people may well seem to be very true. The parties seem to be in peculiar places on this issue. Donald Trump, of course, insisting that if you count the legal votes, he still won that election. Joe Biden saying that he tried to overturn democracy. Well, let's explore this issue with Jake Hunsaker, the US Republican congressional candidate from Utah. Welcome to the programme, Jake. Thank you for getting up quite so early where you are to join us here on GB News. First of all, I want to explore where the Republican Party is on this, because it seems to be looking at various polls. There is some real division. A substantial proportion of your party believe that Donald Trump, in fact, won the election.
Well, that's unfortunately correct. So I've looked at the same polls, and depending on the source, you see between 2/3 and 3/4 of Republicans right now believe that the election was fraudulent, that it was stolen from Donald Trump, and that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. And that is simply not true. And I'm a Republican. I find myself in the rank of conservatives in this country who desperately want to impact change in a Biden administration where we see things breaking from our perspective that we want to fix. We want a voice. We want a seat at the table when it comes to foreign relations. Our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, crisis at our southern border, trade issues with supply chain, and hyperinflation that is triggered by, egregious spending bills. All of this is something that I think, Republicans feel strongly about, but we have to take first things first. And in my view, we cannot be taken seriously as a party until we establish that we believe in truth. And the truth is objectively certified. Joe Biden was the president of the United States. When he took the oath of office, he won last year's election. And we have to accept those results and move on so that we can be credible and relevant going forward. That's the school of thought that I adhere to. But unfortunately, you are correct. I'm in the minority. And that is why I'm running for Congress in my state, in my home district, so that I can try and make a difference on those issues that matter to Americans across the political spectrum. But we have to agree, first of all, we will embrace truth, we will reject extremism and conspiracy theories, and we will come together as an American people to embrace the peaceful transfer of power in this fragile democracy that we call home. That's important to me. I think it's important to voters here as well, and that's my mission right now on the campaign trail.
I was looking on social media last night and seeing those pictures and videos from a year ago resurface. Really quite extraordinary images of people storming through the Capitol, breaking windows, indeed multiple injuries taking place as well. I wonder, however, how much this is still alive in the minds of the American people. We've seen that your party, the Republican Party, is actually doing fairly well in the polls right now. The predictions are that the House will swing back to the Republican Party in the midterm elections, that the Senate may well even swing back too, that the Republican Party is in the ascendancy despite this bad press.
Right. And I believe that that is the case because of what I would view as a very problematic Biden administration. And so, yes, we may well take the House next year. I hope that we do. I hope we take the Senate next year. But this is a short-term strategy. It has no long-term strategy behind it. This idea that we just neglect the truth of January 6th, the reality of the extremism that in some cases we have embraced. If we continue to ignore those facts, we find ourselves in a very short-term political game. And in my view, we really have to start thinking about how we remain relevant long-term. Now, if we can get past that, then we can start talking about substantive issues. Then yes, let's take the House next year. Let's take the Senate, and let's start working on policies and legislation that matters to Americans. But first, we have to show America that we defend the Constitution, that we defend our own institutions, and that we prioritize truth and order and law. As we say we do much of the time, we have to act the way that we speak. And you're right, those images are gut-wrenching. It was a horrifying event last year. I spent the day talking with voters here in my own home district about how it impacted them and reliving some of those horrific emotions and events. And it was a very heavy, very weighty day. And I'm not alone in my own party in acknowledging it was an event we never want to see replicated in this nation again. And I ask for leaders in my own party and for leaders across my country to acknowledge the horror of that day, to acknowledge the realities and the rhetoric that led us to that point, and to commit to never again lead us to a boiling point like we saw last year on January 6th.
Well, powerful words there, Jake Hunsaker. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on the briefing on GB News, and best of luck. Now, thanks to Brexit, the government is overhauling its agricultural incentives. The EU's controversial Common Agricultural Policy, in effect, subsidises farmers based on how much land they owned. But now, the UK government wants to reward landowners instead for how they look after the environment. Farmers in England could now be paid to turn sections of their land into nature reserves or restore floodplains under new plans. Well, what does this all mean? Of course, there have been some criticisms over the proposal due to the lack of detail that some people say are in it. Joining us now is Tim Bonner, the Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance. Welcome to the programme. First of all,
Morning.
These plans not yet fully fleshed out. What do you make of the direction of them?
Well, it's fairly clear where the direction is, and there's two parts to this. The first is I think entirely uncontroversial, and it goes back to the point you made about the Common Agricultural Policy, which was and is an appalling policy. Has failed for years, done a huge amount of damage to the countryside and to farming, I think, in the longer term. And what we're seeing there is a shift from this direct subsidy, people just being paid because they farm, to being paid to do public goods. So being paid to farm in an environmentally friendly way, not to maximise production, not to do, in many cases, to do damage to the environment. So I think that's very much uncontroversial. The issues, there is more detail to come, and there'll be lots of discussion about how best to do this. But frankly, everyone's supportive of that, the environmental movement, everyone's behind that. The second bit is more problematic, I think, in some degree, and that comes back to this idea of taking large areas of land potentially out of agricultural production, and that could have huge benefits for nature, for wildlife, for when we have a biodiversity crisis. But it could also have some really significant impacts on rural communities, on people, and there's a worrying aspect of this, and there's two areas really. One is that there's a lot of very rich people and corporations who are buying into the green agenda, really to salve their conscience, and the second is that there's a growing market in carbon. We used to, the market for farming used to be about beef, sheep, milk, wheat, barley. Now it's about carbon as well, and so we're seeing a lot of people coming into the market, looking to buy farmland, looking to plant trees on that, or to carry out environmental schemes which benefit carbon credits, so that the big corporations in the city can say, well, carbon neutral. Well, they're not. They're still using a lot of carbon, but they're offsetting that, and the impact of that on a lot of rural communities and some really delicate rural economies is quite worrying, and I worry that the people involved aren't going to be consulted enough about these large scale schemes.
Yes, it's interesting. There seems to be pretty widespread agreement that the CAP was a terrible system of subsidy, but we need to be very, very careful in how we replace it and make sure that that's a system that's suited to our farmers and indeed rural stakeholders. I'm afraid we've run out of time on this interview, but Tim Bonner, thank you very much for joining us this morning on the briefing on GB News. Now, turning to something slightly lighter for the end of the programme, Love Island's Molly-Mae Hague, someone I had barely heard of before yesterday, made waves on social media after stating in a podcast that everyone has the same 24 hours in a day and that working hard can lead to success. Now, I wouldn't have thought that these were particularly controversial comments. However, some on social media have taken them to be blaming disadvantaged people for the situations they're in. A social media age version of on your bike philosophy. Well, Let's find out more about this now with the political commentator Emily Carver. Welcome to the programme, Emily. Now, some people have been calling this Love Island star Molly-Mae Thatcher. In your view, is that accurate?
Well, I think she certainly believes in some of the things that Thatcher believed in too. She believes in aspiration, working hard in order to achieve your goals. And she clearly puts great importance in her own life on money and financial gain and wealth. And that's something that she was very honest about in that podcast. I'm very sad, and I do know about Molly-Mae, and I watched the entire podcast over the Christmas holidays. It was about 2 hours long, and she talked about her success. And it's quite interesting. There's been quite a lot of, snobbiness, I think, towards her on the internet, particularly from a lot of what I call left-wing Twitter. She's been ridiculed for the fact that she went on Love Island. And if you listen to the podcast, Love Island was very much a stepping stone for her longer-term goals. She already had a large following on Instagram, and she wanted to make it larger, and she wanted financial gain. She wanted to have brand deals. She wanted to achieve in her life. And she set out to do that. And that's exactly what she managed to do. And, this 24 hours a day, we've all got the same 24 hours in the day as Beyonce. That's not something that Molly-Mae made up. That's a quote that influencers, motivational speakers, all sorts of people use. It's become a bit of a cliche. And it's quite interesting because she actually acknowledged that she'd had luck. And she acknowledged the fact that people have different financial backgrounds, that they can be raised in different ways, that they have different means and so on. But her message to me seemed to be make the most of the opportunities you have and seize them. For her, she's a pretty girl. She's clearly very motivated, and she's gone out and got what she wanted. What's wrong with that?
And I suppose the fundamental difference in philosophy here is those that tell you that a system is hopeless, that you can never achieve, that everything's set against you, that you may as well not try. Well, that philosophy is less likely to breed success than people who tell you, even if in some situations it's harder than others, this sort of boosterism that can get people into a positive mindset, up off the sofa, working, this sort of stuff, even though clearly, for some people in some situations, it's harder than for others. That positivity can really make a difference.
Yes, I mean, you can acknowledge that inequalities exist and that life isn't fair, whilst also appreciating the fact that having a positive mental attitude and seizing the opportunities you have is a good thing. Do we want anyone who's had a hard start in life or been knocked down on the way to just throw in the towel and say, I can't make anything better of myself, I can't achieve? It's also worth pointing out that for Molly-Mae, money is very important. For others, it might be having a family. It might be having a 9-to-5 that they can fit family life around. It might be many other things. They might want to do charity work and so on. And we can celebrate that too. But Molly-Mae was simply saying that people should work hard and they can achieve and believe that the sky's the limit. I think that's a positive message that we all should live by. And what's also interesting is that she came from a thoroughly ordinary background. No, she wasn't in poverty, but she came from a very ordinary background. Her parents were both police officers, I believe. Her sister is now working in the army, and she wanted to make a way in this industry of influencing brand deals and so on. And I think good on her.
Well, what a positive way to end this interview and indeed the programme. Political commentator Emily Carver, thank you very much for joining us and explaining that slightly peculiar social media story for us this morning. Thank you. Well, that's it for me and the briefing this morning. I'll be back on Monday morning. Coming up onto the point, it's Patrick Christie's and Anaya Falarin Iman, and they'll be talking about many cultural issues as well as the news. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Morning. A few places waking up to a covering of snow this morning. Further sleet and snow showers to come during the day today, and quite icy out there as well. There are Met Office warnings in place. Here's the bigger picture. Low pressure to the north.